In this video, we're now going to focus on creating the online assessment and reference checks to support the generic pipeline that we've created. Before we do so, I'll just drag our spreadsheet in again and we'll revisit what we've done so far. So you can see that we've created our pipeline, we've got these stages, we decided the order that we wanted by defining it here, and then subsequent to that we then created the two notifications. See, what's going to happen is when a candidate enters our registration phase, we want them to complete the candidate registration form. We inform the candidate to complete it by way of this notification template. And you'll recall in our previous video we created these two notification templates, and they've got the associated links to these particular online forms. And in this video we're now going to create those online forms. So let's close that and let's just revisit again, just a little bit of a recap. So in here we specified within our recruitment, we specified our pipeline. So we created the stages, we set the order, we haven't set any of the automations yet. The first thing we did was create the actual stages as we see them here. Then subsequent to that we then created the notification templates. This was our candidate registration template and our online induction template. So now we want to create our three online forms. The first one we're going to create is our candidate registration form. So let's give it a title. I think it's a good idea to be quite verbose. So this one here, candidate registration, is going to be for our generic onboarding job. So what that means is we can create any number of assessments, and they can be different depending on the pipeline that you want to attach them to. So typically you may have different assessments depending on the positions that you're trying to recruit for. So now with this one we're doing a generic one. Remember, our generic one is about bringing candidates into our pipeline so that we can get them fully inducted and ready to be put on jobs even though they aren't applying for a specific vacancy. So what we're going to do now is just an example, and hopefully it'll take we'll spend a few minutes doing this, but hopefully you get a really good understanding of what the capability is. So you're not bound by this, they're purely examples. So let's imagine the first question we want to check them on is we want to check whether or not they are able to work in Australia. So the first thing we'll do is, are you an Australian citizen? I like to bold them, it always looks nicer as bold. Now mandatory, what mandatory means is that the candidate is not going to be able to complete this application form if all mandatory questions have not been answered. So now we look at our response types. So what that means is when we ask the question of the candidate, how do we want them to respond? And these are the various options that they have. Now I won't go through all the options yet because again that's the detailed options are covered in our more extensive course, but for the moment we're talking about our generic default settings that we provide when we first deploy your Recruit Complete solution. So I'll just do the examples, but very quickly, text response, multi-choice. There's even the concept of video. You can ask your candidates to video themselves. Yes, no, number, date, objects, attachments, scales, images, MFA, and lookup. And I'm going to cover most of these in this example. So the first thing we say, are you an Australian citizen? Well, the obvious response to that is yes, they are, or no, they're not. So we'll save that. Now, if they say yes to this, so we'll edit this. They say yes to this. What do we want to do? Well, if they're an Australian citizen, then we know that they are valid to work in Australia, so we can move them directly to in this case, our triage and interview pipeline stage. So we'll accept that. If they say no, then we want to ask them another question. So maybe a good example is, well, we know that if they're an New Zealand citizen, that they are permanent residents in Australia and therefore can work. So we'll ask that question now. So this is the concept of secondary questions. In other words, based on a response to one question, we can ask another. And you can ask secondaries on secondaries, there's absolutely no limit. So again, this would be yes, and we'll save that. And then if they say yes, what do we want to do? We can move them straight to the triage status again. So we'll just triage and interview. So therefore, any New Zealanders, any Australians will not be required to confirm their immigration status. So we'll save that. But if they say no this time, we want to move them to the right to work check. So there we are. So that means the candidates come in here, they're not an Australian citizen, they're not a New Zealand citizen, they are therefore immediately going to be automatically placed into the pipeline stage to do the right to work check. So we'll save that. So we've now got our first question done. So are you an Australian citizen? The second thing we want to ask is, have they had any prior work injuries? Maybe we've got to check for prior conditions. So we'll do that. So have you had any mandatory? So if they say yes, then we want to ask another question, okay? Because what we're trying to find out is some detail about that. So we'll go yes, and we go secondary here, and then the next question we're going to ask is, please provide, because now they said yes, we want to provide details. Now, because it's injury, we go into our object options. Now, object options you're going to see a little bit of through this example that we do in this video. So in this, we can ask them for their education history, their skills, their licenses and so forth. So we're looking for their injury history. What this means is when they get this question, it's going to pop up a form with the specific fields required to capture their historical injuries. So we'll save that. So we'll close. We'll save this and close. So now we know about the work injuries. And you'll see what we did is that depending on the answer they gave us, we then asked a different question. In other words, provide us the details. So then we'll ask another one. Again, if they say yes, then we're going to ask them to upload a copy of their passport. So then we come down here, now we're looking for an object, and here we are looking for their passport details. Again, then it says, are we requiring an attachment? If we say yes, they cannot complete the question without uploading a copy of their passport. So we can now close that. So now we get the next question, please provide your date of birth. Hopefully when I apply for a job they don't ask me whether I can type or not, because I would fail immediately. So this time we ask for again an object, because what the objects do, just explaining, not only does it change the form dynamically so that the form is displayed with the right data that we want to capture, but it also updates the master record of the candidate. So everything we're capturing in this question will ultimately go to the candidate's file as well. Next question, just showing you different examples. So again, an object, this time we're looking for licenses. Actually, that's not right, because the first thing we're asking is, do you have a motor vehicles license, yes or no? If they say yes, then we ask them to provide please upload a copy of your Again, we do want them to upload a copy, so we say that, so we're good. Another question we can ask is them to update their certificates. Now this is an example where in this case you wouldn't make it mandatory because we don't know if the candidate's got any certificates. So we can say it's not mandatory, but again we update the object, we grab the certificates, we say save, and we can ask them for an attachment if they load any, in other words a copy of the certificate that they hold. So the next question we might ask them is to provide some references. Again, we can't make that mandatory, maybe they don't have any. Yep, so what do we get? We get their reference detail. Where have we got that? Referee. Then the next question is, do you suffer from any allergies? So now we can, just a slightly different example, if they say no, great. If they say yes, we want them to provide some additional detail. Now, therefore we ask for a text response. So there's an example of some questions that we're asking in this reference check. We're asking them whether they're a citizen. If they're not a citizen, then we check if they're a New Zealand citizen. If they're not, then we send them to a right to work check. Then we're asking for some information that's important. Injury, passports, date of birth, motor vehicle, and so forth. This is the kind of forms that we can create, and we've got the complete flexibility to do so. So likewise, I'll save that. Now I want to introduce you to just something that helps us do some really cool stuff around authentication. In our company settings under plugin, and again you can only do this if you're account administrator, we have a plugin called MFA. Where have I got that? Multi-factor authentication. So what that means is that when a candidate applies or fills out a question or answers a question, we can ask them to confirm to confirm a code that is sent to their mobile phone. It's a way of ensuring that they are the person providing the answers and updating their application forms as we see fit here. So that's why I'm going to just modify this question, this assessment that we're building just a little bit, because we want to make sure that the person responding to this is indeed them. So remember that what's going to happen is the candidate's going to get the email notification with a link. When they click on that link, they're going to get this form to complete. And so we do a double check to make sure that it is them that is completing the form. Saves us having to do digital signatures, for example. So then we ask a couple of questions around that. So the first thing we're going to say is, do you declare So that's really just a simple one. It's mandatory, yes they do, or either they don't. Now if they say no, you can do this sort of thing. You can say no, and you can directly reject them. You could say, or you could move them directly to the unsuccessful stage. So there's an example of they're out of here. They're not willing to confirm that it's correct, so we don't really want to employ them. So that's a good process of automatic vetting. So we'll save that. We'll close that. Then the last question I want to ask is this one. Whoops, again I can't type. Now this is mandatory, and here we select the multi-factor authentication code. Save. Now here I can specify whether the code is text only, email or either. So often you'll do either because we don't necessarily know if they've got a mobile phone available to them or they're doing everything through the email. So we now have completed our candidate registration form for generic onboarding. So we'll save that. In the next video we're going to create the induction, and then the video after that we're going to create the the reference check. Thank you very much.